Subscribe to our YouTube channel for in-depth interviews of India Inc. and press the bell icon so that you do not miss our updates.
Hello and welcome to Nirmal Bang, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Hiral Dadia. We have with us Nitin Soni, director at Fitch Ratings, joining in. Nitin, welcome to the show, and it's a pleasure to speak to you as well after a really long time. I hope everything is safe around.
Thanks, Hiral, for having me on the show. Yes, it's going good. I'm based in Singapore, so it's much better situation here in terms of COVID.
Absolutely. Nitin, let's start with the kind of impact we've seen with regards to COVID. I think no one really expected such unprecedented times. No sectors, no economies have been saved. However, telecom as a sector had its pros and cons. And I think pros were way higher taking COVID into consideration because the usage increased. And overall, there was some bit of a positive impact that did come in on the telecom sector as a whole. How would you describe this full journey from March to now?
Okay, thanks for the question. So, firstly, when COVID happened and in the initial months of calendar year 2020, um, the situation was quite uncertain. We knew that the first impact, which is going to be that the sales of smartphones will plunge
Mm,
significantly. But then the whole situation of work from home and a significant increase in data demand unfolded. And we believe that has benefited most of the telcos, including the Indian telcos, which
mm,
have seen a significant jump in their data consumption. Now, if you look at the results in the last quarter, in September quarter, Bharti had data usage per subscriber per month about 16 GB, and Geo has a similar data usage. So that is one of the highest data usage if you compare regionally in the Asian markets. Maybe China would have higher, but India is way up in terms of the data consumption. So I think most of the telcos have benefited from the increase in data consumption, and also the fact that the 2G, 3G subscribers are moving over to the 4G network.
mm,
While initially the lower sales of smartphones had an impact, and that movement from 2G, 3G to 4G was a bit disappointing. But I think by the end of August, September, when people came out and lockdowns were, the curbs were lessened, the smartphone sales recovered. And now we believe that the smartphone sales are at a similar level as was in 2019. So I think that will further increase the migration of 2G, 3G subscribers to 4G. And also one of the other trending thing which has happened is that that Geo is already on 4G. So Geo has a complete 4G network. But both Bharti and Vodafone Idea have been shutting down their 3G networks, and that is enabling subscribers to move to 4G network.
mm.
So that is also increasing the data consumption. So overall, I would say COVID has actually benefited the telecom sector in terms of higher usage, and mostly the people have also realized that data consumption is such an indispensable part of their monthly consumption spend, that they can't just spend on something
Mm.
spend less on telecom and spend something more on the other spends. So I think this trend will continue, and we believe the data consumption is going to grow in the medium term.
Right. And Nitin, with this, with regards to data consumption, right now there is a major price war that we have been witnessing, especially with regards to the Indian market, because clearly what's happening is higher usage, lower pricing. How sustainable is this? Because what's happening is we've come down to mainly three players right now. And if this kind of a price war continues, I don't think so. We'll be surprised if there are one or two players left in the market.
Yes. So what is happening in the Indian telecom space for the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years has been that, when we had several players at one point of time, we had about 11 to 13 telecom companies, and the competition, I would say, was fiercer, earlier than now. And many groups and telecom companies have to fold up and file bankruptcies or exit by selling their assets to the existing telecom companies, and that has resulted into three big telecom companies now. And even among these three, Reliance Jio as the market leader,
Mm,
Bharti as number two, and Vodafone Idea as number three. Vodafone Idea is in a very precarious situation. Their balance sheet is quite weak, and their cash generation is way weaker than to support continuous investment in capex and networks. In fact, their cash generation is not even sufficient to pay the interest
mm,
cost.
mm,
So we are definitely heading towards a private duopoly with a very weak third player, Vodafone Idea. You know that they are in the market to raise $3.4 billion, but we believe that their fundraising will not be sufficient to restore their competitive strengths. So yes, market will consolidate further. We believe that revenue market share will consolidate in the hands of Jio and Bharti, and this consolidation will continue. But I would say that the price competition is actually more benign right now.
mm,
So you would have seen that the average revenue per user for Bharti, Jio, and Vodafone Idea, they have been on improving trend.
mm,
I think 2018 was the year when the average revenue per user bottomed out at around 100 rupees levels. Since then, and as Jio increase their subscriber base to 300 plus million. Right now they're at 405 million, but as soon as they cross 300, the tendency of the telcos was to generate more profits rather than to snatch away the market share from the
mm, mm.
competition. And we saw in December 2019, after the AGR verdict of the Supreme Court, that all the telcos came together and said that they're going to raise prices.
Mm.
So we believe that at the moment, the competition in terms of price wars is more benign. It's ARPU will improve from here on, rather than price competition will intensify. But Vodafone Idea, being a weaker player, will continue to lose market share.
Right. So with this, when you're talking about fundraising as well, this is the time when, it's the best opportunity that the telecom sector can grab, and it's come after really a very long time. In this kind of a booming market, fundraising is of top priority. And you are seeing FPIs that have been scaling down their investments in the telecom sector. What would this mean? Because it's mainly Geo who we've seen that, in this time of a downtake in terms of fundraising, they are the ones who've garnered maximum. But if you remove Geo out of the system right now, FPIs have been scaling down. How does this augur for competition for the sector as a whole from a longer term perspective?
So clearly, both Jio and Bharti have raised substantial amount of money, especially Jio, which has raised $20 billion
Mm,
plus from the likes of Facebook and several other marquee investors, private equity groups. And I think the Jio's vision is much larger than the other telecom companies. It's not only the telecom space; it's also e-commerce and payment technologies and entertainment. So they have several investments in news channels and entertainment segments. So their vision is clearly much larger than the other bread and butter telecom companies, I would say, like Vodafone Idea and Bharti to some extent. Bharti has also raised substantial amount of money in the last 2 years. They have raised about $7 to $8 billion. They did a rights issue in Indian markets, and then they invited equity injection from international investors. Singapore Telecom which is the telecom company based in Singapore, is a substantial shareholder in Bharti Airtel, so they have invested money. I think the only one is Vodafone Idea, which has been unable to raise any equity from outside India. So they also raised, I think, about $3 billion in rights issue, and so that was subscribed. And obviously, the sponsors, Birla Group and Vodafone Group PLC, invested money in Vodafone Idea, but they have been unable to get equity from outside India, and that's why they are on the market right now to raise $3.4 billion. I think, as from an investor's point of view, they would obviously see who is going to be, competitively a stronger telecom company going forward. And clearly, most of the investors see that, Geo is already a market leader in terms of revenue market share and has a larger vision. So an equity injection makes sense in Reliance Geo platform.
Mm.
And Bharti obviously has also raised money because of its resilience to maintain its market position despite such intense market competition. Yeah, so I think it's selective. I mean, we can't really generalize for the overall industry. It has to be selective based on the telecom companies. But I would say it would be tough to see how much money would Vodafone Idea will be able to raise, given they not only require $3.4 billion. I think they require much larger money to survive in this industry.
Right. And then with this, with regards to where the AGR dues are concerned, now that we know that, clearly Airtel has dues worth around 43, 44,000 odd crores, out of which around 18,000 odd crores is something which is already paid out. Similarly for Vodafone as well, do you think the 10 years that have been given to repay is going to be enough? And do you think the repayments will be on time? Or this is going to again lead to another negotiation with the government, according to you?
So let's take it one by one.
Mm.
Firstly, on Bharti Airtel, I think their balance sheet position is quite strong at the moment, having raised $7 to $8 billion in last 2 years. Their net leverage, as Fitch calculates, is about 2 to 2.2 times, which is strong for a triple B minus rating. And given the fact that Indian market, wireless market, has been on an improving trend, and average revenue per user has been growing, I think their cash generation will only strengthen from here on. And their African markets, which is one third of their revenue and EBITDA, is also growing really well at 10 to 15%. So that is also contributing a significant portion of revenue and EBITDA for Bharti Group as a whole. So I think Bharti would not have any major problem in payment of these AGR dues with a 2 year moratorium and then 10 years payment to the government. So they will definitely be able to pay that amount from their cash generation and continue to improve their balance sheet.
Hmm.
But when you talk about Vodafone Idea, I think Vodafone Idea is in a vicious circle of situation where they don't have the balance sheet to fund their capex. And when you don't fund your capex, you lose market share. And
Hmm.
when you lose market share, you lose cash generation. And
Correct.
your cash generation is so low that it's not even sufficient to meet your interest cost because your debt is so large. So it's a very difficult situation for them to come out. And as I said before, they need a much larger investment than $3.4 billion to sustain their competitive position,
Hmm.
because this is a market where you, even if you're not growing, just to maintain your networks to a similar level, you need to spend $2 to $3 billion a year.
Hmm.
As Geo is fast strengthening its network. I mean, their network is new and they have a large capacity of network, 4G network. Bharti has rapidly shut down their 3G network and
Hmm.
is now moving all their subscribers to 4G networks. And they are also investing heavily on the 4G networks and fiberization of towers. And both Jio and Bharti know that they have to be ready for the 5G
Hmm.
spectrum auctions, which may happen this year or the next. So, from that perspective, Vodafone Idea is in a very weak position because, firstly, they are not investing enough in their networks, and they don't have the capex sufficient to invest in future in strengthening their 4G and 5G
Mm.
networks. So I mean, I would say that going forward, we would see Vodafone Idea as a weak third player. They could have to close some of the markets where they are weak. They have a weak market position and concentrate maybe a stronger Indian states like Delhi, Mumbai, and Tamil Nadu, and others where they have a decent market position. And I think that could be a way to go forward for Vodafone Idea, unless some external investor infuse a large sum of money in that company.
Right. So with this, when we're talking of troubles right now, again, we are saying that the telecom space is probably emerging from here on. But taking the AGR dues into consideration, taking the spectrum auction into consideration, which will start in the month of March, uh, do you think the debt profile of the sector as a whole is going to rise probably, say, in the next 12 to 18 months? And that's something which will again turn troublesome. And the tariff hikes that would be taken in the next 18 to 24 months will not be enough to suffice or service that.
Sure. So again, let's take it by telecom company to company. Reliance Jio is, as a Reliance industry as a whole,
Hmm.
they have a target to keep a net cash position on their balance sheet. So which means they will have a higher cash balance than their total debt.
Hmm.
So they are in a very, very strong position. So their balance sheet is quite strong to go out and bid for spectrum assets in the March auction and in the future 5G spectrum auctions. So, their balance sheet is quite strong. When you talk about Bharti, which has a FFO net leverage of about 2 to 2.2 times, so I think they would also be in a fairly reasonable position for the spectrum auctions. Because remember, when you bid for the spectrum assets in these auctions, you don't have to pay upfront everything.
Correct.
So you only pay about 25 to 30% upfront, and the balance is to be paid over 10 years with a 2-year moratorium.
Hmm.
Sorry, not 10 years, to the life of the spectrum assets, which is about 16 years.
Hmm.
So they would have a reasonable time frame to pay for these spectrum assets for Bharti. So we have already factored, the amount of money they are going to pay for the upcoming spectrum auctions in March, which is mostly to renew the spectrum assets in the 1800 megahertz bandwidth. And going forward in the 5G spectrum auctions, whenever that happens. So we have already factored about 1.5 to $2 billion for upfront payment in the next 2 years for Bharti. And we believe that the cash generation, which will strengthen in the next 2 years because of improving average revenue per user, will be sufficient to maintain the balance sheet strength despite the payment of these
Hmm.
1.5 to $2 billion.
Hmm.
But now, when you come to Vodafone Idea again, they are in a very weak position. I mean, they already have a substantial amount of debt, and their cash generation is not improving. It's either stagnant
Hmm.
or it's declining on a quarter by quarter basis. So I think for them, it's going to be a major decision whether they want to pay more for the spectrum assets and how they are going to fund the payment for the spectrum asset. And as I said before, I think uh, they might go for renewing some of the spectrum assets in the March auction, but it would be highly unlikely for them to bid for 5G spectrum assets, given their weak balance sheet position.
Right. So with this, if you have to talk about tariff hikes, by what's the, ideal tariff hike that should happen within the industry in the next 12 to 18 months, if even if it has to be in bits and pieces, on an average, what's the hike that you should be expecting?
So, see, I think there are two parts of this question: that what should
Hmm?
happen and how will it
Will it
happen, right?
happen?
I think the first thing is that, definitely India is one of the cheapest market in the world. I mean, there's no question about it. The amount of monthly spend on telecom is only $2,
Correct.
which is one of the cheapest in the world, and the data consumption is one of the highest at
Mm,
16 GB per month per user. So tariff has to improve, but I think tariff improvement can only happen when all the three telecom companies are in a position to increase tariff. If you see from the point of view of Reliance Jio, they are not in a hurry to raise tariff because they are experiencing a very strong revenue and EBITDA growth on a quarterly basis, and they are easily managing to improve their subscriber base as well. They are already at 405 million subscribers, and Vodafone Idea is losing about 5 to 7 million subscribers a quarter. So, naturally, Geo is gaining subscribers, so they don't need to increase tariff from here on. But Vodafone Idea, on the other hand, must be desperate, in my view, to increase tariff because they are the ones who are suffering with low cash generation, and they want to increase cash generation. And one of the ways to increase cash generation is to increase tariff.
mm,
So, in my view, uh, we what we envisage is that I think the first step will be taken by Vodafone Idea to increase
mm,
tariff once the COVID situation subsides, probably in the next 6 to 12 months, because they are also in the market to raise $3.4 billion, and I'm sure when they're talking to those investors and lenders, they would be telling those investors that we want to increase tariff, and at some point of time we will increase tariff, and that will increase cash generation.
mm,
So I think they will do the first step in increasing tariff, and Bharti most likely would be welcome to increase tariff as well. But it's questionable whether Geo would increase tariff at that moment or not. And Geo would probably look to gain more subscribers and at the expense of Vodafone Idea. So it's a very tricky situation for
mm,
Vodafone Idea. But I think overall, in the medium term, I would we think that there is a scope for a tariff increase anywhere about 15 to 20%, and we believe that in the next 12 to 18 months we should see a level of about 200 rupees on average revenue per user. Bharti is at around about 165.
mm,
Reliance Jio is slightly smaller, slightly lower than that, and Vodafone Idea is also around 140, 150 levels. So, yeah, there is also a second aspect to improving tariff, which is the natural increase in tariff, because as 2G, 3G subscribers move to 4G, they spend more on 4G. So naturally, the ARPU increases uh, without even
mm,
increase in headline tariff. So that naturally is improving tariff by 5 to 10%. But
mm.
with the headline tariff, we expect that the tariff to reach around 200 levels in the next 12 to 18 months.
Right. And then with this, what's your view with regards to floor price discussions which are on right now? Do you think that's something which could come in as a rescue, or that's something which should not be really initiated? Because at one point in time, we've been talking about deregularizing the sector. So when it's deregularized, why would you really want the government to come and interfere on that front? So how would you actually see the entire scenario with regards to floor price discussions?
So I'm not very hopeful on floor prices. I don't think that will likely happen. And so the main reason why I think that is, the regulator already know that the market is improving in terms of tariff, and
Mm,
most of the telcos have taken initiatives to increase average revenue per user starting from December 2019. So the floor tariff only serves your purpose when the market is too competitive to damage their own balance sheet, and regulator has to step in to prevent that damage, self-inflicted damage by the telecom companies. And very few countries we have seen have floor tariff. So for example, Sri Lanka had floor tariff at some one point of time because there was too much competition in the
mm,
telecom space there. In Korea, regulator steps in occasionally when telecom companies spend too much money on marketing. So, there are different nuances in different markets, but regulator only steps in when there is too much competition. But right now, the Indian telecom companies are actually trying to improve tariff. So I don't think regulator will impose floor tariff at this moment.
Right. And then with this, with regards to where, if you have to talk about the spectrum auctions as well, how do you view that? Because we are expecting the auctions to start, I think, from March 2021. Are you expecting any major participation? And if yes, how much do you think that the exchequer will be able to garner out of it?
So I wouldn't hazard a guess on how much will be the
Mm,
total value to the exchequer, but what I would say is that we expect both Jio and Bharti to renew their expiring spectrum assets. So Jio has some of the spectrum assets which they got in agreement with Reliance Communication, and I think some of those spectrum assets are expiring in 1800 in
mm,
1800 megahertz or in around the lower band of 800 megahertz. I don't have the numbers in hand right now, but I think, given their strong balance sheet and their market position, they would go for renewing those spectrum assets which are coming for expiry in the next 1 or 2 years. Same for Bharti. I think they have certain spectrum assets in cities where in states where it's expiring in the next 1 or 2 years in the 1800 megahertz
mm,
spectrum. So they would also most likely go for renewal of all their spectrum assets. Uh, Vodafone Idea also, to a limited extent, I would say, where the amount of money involved is not that significant, they would go and renew their spectrum assets.
mm,
But I would be really surprised if they go and buy additional new spectrum assets, which I think is unlikely for Vodafone Idea. Geo might selectively acquire more spectrum assets which are meant for 5G usage in future.
mm,
So the lower bandwidth, like 800, 700 megahertz spectrum, they might go for those spectrum assets which in future can be swapped for 5G usage. And obviously, as you go the lower bandwidth spectrum, they have a wider coverage, and the higher bandwidth spectrum, like in 2100, 2300, are used for providing kind of an umbrella coverage to the lower spectrum. So
mm.
I think they might go for those strategically. They can go for those lower bandwidth spectrum for 5G usage in future.
Right. And then do you think, with the usage as well, 5G could be likely in 2021, or is it far-fetched?
No, I'm not very hopeful for 5G in the next at least 12 months. I think 5G spectrum auctions might only happen in 2022 and beyond. And the actual commercial launch of 5G might not even happen in the next 2 years. So we are, in fact, looking at 2023. And
Okay.
why we say that is because if you look at the Indian market, I mean, the 4G penetration is itself only 55%
Mm,
right now.
mm,
And so there is a still huge leg room to grow for 4G usage.
mm,
And at the moment, there are not many applications which cannot be served by 4G speeds.
mm,
So most of the usage normally we do, you're looking at YouTube streams, looking at Netflix or Hotstar or other applications can be served by 4G. So why do you need actually 5G when most of the users are enjoying 4G speeds and they are very happy about it?
mm,
And the second aspect to the 5G launch is that uh, if the telcos are aiming to price 5G higher than 4G, I think they will struggle because when a customer are enjoying the same speed at 4G, so that why would a customer would want to pay more?
more.
So it's a very tricky situation for telecom companies also to spend for 5G spectrum assets and to get a reasonable return on investment on that
Mm,
spend. So as we have seen in 4G as well, I mean, all these telecom companies paid a substantial amount of money for 4G spectrum assets, but the return on investment has been very low because in the initial years when you are still ramping up your 4G networks, your return is already very low.
Hmm.
And even when the 4G penetration is about 50%, and the ARPU is still languishing at about $2, the return on investment is still not that high.
Hmm.
So I think they will be very cautious in terms of how they tactically launch 5G, how they market 5G to lure customers to pay more for 5G network speeds.
Right. And then with this, another aspect, Nitin, is with regards to the IUC charges. Now that, zero IUC regime has started from the 1st of January itself, how big a benefit do you think it is going to be for the sector?
I think IOC will be largely neutral for
Hmm.
most of the telecom companies. Um, Geo, which started charging for the IUC, have recently said that they will not be charging for IUC, so their voice calls are absolutely free off net and on net. And Bharti and Vodafone Idea also, they are mostly neutral in terms of net IUC payments, because as Reliance Jio's subscriber base has increased beyond 400 million, their interconnection traffic movements have become largely neutral. So I think IUC is a non-event going forward, and it's not going to affect uh, financial performance of these companies. And also, if you see, most of the users are also using voice over internet to talk. I mean, we hardly use voice calls now. We use WhatsApp call more and more. So I think the entire traffic of voice calls is moving gradually over to the internet. So the IUC regime is actually gradually becoming redundant.
Right. And very lastly, do you think that the sector is at an inflection point whereby, say, the next leg of growth for the sector is going to be the non-teleco business, say cloud services, or say the enterprise business, fixed broadband services, or digital? And if you have to talk about the core business for telecom players, it would be 5G.
I think, see, firstly, a large part of revenue and EBITDA for these companies will still remain wireless revenue, the 4G and 5G network usage. The other segments of the market, which are fixed broadband or enterprise, yes, they are growing strongly. In fact, fixed broadband is one of the sectors uh, which has a very low penetration in India. I mean, we as a country of 1.3 billion population at least have 200 to 250 million homes.
Hmm.
And if you look at the Bharti's fixed broadband size in terms of homes covered is only 2.5 to 3 million. And Reliance Jio, having recently launched its fixed broadband network, their size in terms of fixed broadband reach is also smaller than
Hmm.
what the addressable population is. So there is a huge growth which is waiting to happen in fixed broadband,
Hmm.
but it's still a smaller market than what wireless market provides you in terms of revenue and EBITDA, in terms of share numbers. Enterprise sector is, again, is one of the growing segment, and we believe that segment will get a fillip when 5G will be launched, because we believe that 5G initial usage will be more on the enterprise sector than on retail sector, because it is the enterprise sector which will start using 5G much more extensively before a retail customer does. So yes, I think both these sectors and segments are growing really fast,
Hmm.
but still the bulk of the money will still continue to come from the wireless market segment.
Right. All right, Nitin. I think great insights that we've picked up from the sector. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. It was a pleasure to have you. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well. Thank you and stay safe.
Thanks, Hiral. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.